Since the dawn of recorded time, the world has honored those who lived in greatness. The conquerors of civilizations, builders of cities, artists, scientists, philosophers. June 19th, 1977, thousands will come to St. Peter's Square in Rome to honor John Neumann, a man who possessed a very different kind of greatness.
John Neumann was a very simple person. He was a person, I think, with great love.
Well, I'm a teacher and a mother, and I like the way John Neumann was very concerned about children. He, not only did he start schools for them, but he tried to make sure that they weren't working in factories at a very early age, and he treated them like equal human beings. He didn't look down on them, or he respected them, and I think you can learn a lot from children, and I think he did too.
He is a man of great intellect, great capacity. He's a man of great learning. And of course, he was a man of intense devotion to the church and to God. But in addition to all that, he was a very human, warm person who loved his fellow man.
John Neumann would not have been declared a saint if it weren't for Michael Flanagan. He was the final link to the canonization of Philadelphia's fourth bishop. In 1963, a usually fatal form of bone cancer struck Michael when he was 6 years old. Doctors gave him a few months to live. Bea Flanagan, Michael's mother, refused to believe the doctors.
I just could never believe it from the time my husband came home and told me. I was really afraid that the leg was going to come off. That was my biggest fear, but never that he would die. My husband's cousin suggested that we take him up to Bishop Newman's shrine, which we did. And Father Litz was there, and we all prayed together, said the novena. I had a relic, which I kept on Michael all the time. I thought all along that this was going to happen. And I prayed to Bishop Newman that if it was through his intercession, to show me some kind of a sign. And I prayed that his hair would grow back, because he lost most of his hair. And in the beginning of December, at his birthday party, he had a toupee on. And at the end of December, he had a full head of hair. So that was my sign.
When Bea Flanagan turned to Bishop Neumann for help, she was continuing a Philadelphia tradition that began long before Bishop Newman's death in 1860. Father Leo McKenzie, Director of Communications for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
John Neumann was a good person, a down-to-earth man who really loved his people. In addition to his work as a priest, he added to that the administration of a bishop. He never stopped serving his people. It was he who visited them when they were sick and when they were in difficulty. He was the one who helped them through their depression and discouragement. He always had a word of kindness for them. He found the work of a bishop a burden to him. The people he served, the poor, youth, the hungry, the lonely, the ones he really loved, were the ones who loved him dearly after his death. It was they who came to his tomb for the 25 years after his death. They were the ones who changed the church around and told them to re-examine the life of this good bishop.
Among the 20,000 Americans in Rome for the canonization was Philadelphia author and historian Robert Wilson.
He appeals to me most as a man who never gave up. He was full of zeal. And from the time when he first went to school and seemed to be denied an opportunity to become a priest, he overcame his obstacles. He came to this country under great difficulty as an immigrant. And he became a priest, and then he became a missionary.
Sunday morning, June 19th, 1977. From this day on, John Neumann will be called a saint. It is an honor that has been granted since the early days of the church. A way of recognizing those who have lived good lives. The voices of the Philadelphia Collegiate Choir echo in the background. Bernini's colonnade embraces more than 30,000 people as Pope Paul VI officially declares John Neumann a saint. For the honor of the Most Holy Trinity, for the exaltation of the Catholic faith and the increase of the Christian life, by the authority of our Lord Jesus Christ, of the holy apostles Peter and Paul, and by our own authority. After having reflected for a long time and invoked the divine aid, having obtained the counsel of many of our brother bishops, we declare and define that Blessed John Nepomucene Neumann is a saint.
Beatum Ioannem Nepomucenum Neumann Sanctum.
And we inscribe him in the calendar of the saints and establish that he should be devoutly honored among the saints in the universal church.
In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Greetings to you, brethren and sons and daughters of the United States of America. We welcome you with festive joy, and together with you, the entire Catholic Church sings a hymn of heavenly victory of St. John Nepomucene Neumann, who receives the honor of one who lives in the glory of Christ. His love for people was authentic brotherly love. It meant that he gave himself to others. And today, with the evangelists, we solemnly proclaim, there is no greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends.
In addition to the offertory gifts of bread and wine, Pope Paul received medicine, a scale bottle of Bishop Neumann High School in Philadelphia, clothing, and a rice bowl. Signs of Bishop Neumann's concern for the sick, the young, and the poor. The Pope and 200 other priests give the gift of finest wheat, the Eucharist, to thousands at the canonization Mass. For John Flanagan, Michael's father, it was an unforgettable day.
Well, it's probably the most important day of our life. I think the greatest moment was when Pope Paul declared him a saint. And then today, being Father's Day, is probably the greatest Father's Day gift that any person could ever possibly get.
After the canonization, the Flanagans met privately with Pope Paul.
We had an audience with the Pope, and just when he walked into the room, you get chills all over you, knowing that you're going to meet this man personally. And I thought it was the greatest thing in the world to meet the Pope.
I had a strange feeling, just like that what was about to happen to me, like that I was going to meet the Pope. He went around and, Cardinal introduced us, Cardinal Kroll, and the Pope asked me to say a prayer for him to my saint. It surprised me. So many people have asked me, like, to say prayers for him, I realized that, everybody, they really need a prayer, and I guess the Pope needs one too.
Among others attending the audience were Father Francis Litz, a Redemptorist, who has spent 21 years of his life working for John Neumann's canonization, and Philadelphia's mayor, Frank Rizzo.
In my opinion, he was declared a saint because he led a saintly life.
Neumann Stahl is an American relative of John Neumann, who possesses a prized family relic of the saint.
This is the pectoral cross, the cross worn by the bishop during the 8 years of his episcopacy in Philadelphia. The cross has 12 relics in it, 5 of which have been identified, the foremost of one of which, of course, is St. Peter the Apostle. The cross comes to me by reason of my great-grandfather being a first cousin and contemporary of the bishop, his only relative,
in Philadelphia.
The thing that appeals to me most about John Neumann was the way he dealt with discouragement, with pressure on him. He never wanted to be a bishop, but it was forced on him. And no sooner did he accept the role of bishop when people were saying he wasn't the right time, that they'd rather have someone else, and there was pressure to get him to retire or to transfer. But he was able to weather all that. He found great strength in his work. Now, it has a great lesson for me, and I think for a lot of people today, how we're able to deal with pressures on us, pressures that we're unable to cope with at times. John Neumann did it, and it's an encouragement to me.
Three days after the canonization, Pope Paul VI greeted more than 10,000 Americans in St. Peter's Basilica. It was the largest number of Americans to ever meet with a pope in the Basilica. For the vast majority, this day will probably mark the only time in their lives when they will be part of an audience with the successor to St. Peter the Apostle.
Dear sons and daughters from the United States, there are wonderful days for America. The canonization of St. John Neumann, as we said in our Angelus talk in last Sunday, is a glory for the American people, a glory that is spiritual, religious.
A successor to Bishop Neumann in Philadelphia, Cardinal John Kroll, was among the American bishops at the audience.
Your name. God bless you. We shall pray for you. Thank you very much.
One week after the Rome ceremonies, an ethnic parade recalling Bishop Neumann's concern for immigrants preceded a mass on Logan Square in Philadelphia. The city was honoring a man whose greatness did not consist in landing on the moon or conquering diseases. His greatness was in serving God, loving the unloved, guarding the education of children, caring to the needs of strangers in a new land.
His clothes were poor, he had no flair to see, but they didn't know to him it mattered more that you show your love, though rich or poor. He was a bishop and he was their friend.
As Cardinal Kroll noted, such deeds are not ordinary when done faithfully over a lifetime.
When Neumann's heroic virtue was solemnly proclaimed on December the 11th, 1921, Pope Benedict declared, "The most simple of works, if carried out with constant perfection in the midst of inevitable difficulties, can bring every servant of God to the attainment of heroic virtue. Rather precisely in the simplicity of these works we find a great argument on the basis of which we can say to the faithful of every age, you are all obliged to venerate John Neumann.
Now his story is for all to hear. The story is love and the message is clear, that he taught us how to love and care, and he showed us